Dear colleagues, welcome to the third session of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks. This event is organized in hybrid mode with attendees with us in Geneva at the Centre Administratif de Varambé and a few others online. As mentioned earlier today, every fall, we are delighted to welcome the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights to Geneva as he reports to the Council on issues related to his mandate. We then took this occasion to organize the Geneva Toxic Free Talks on the sidelines of the Human Rights Council. This is the good moment in the year to harness the opportunity to reflect on the challenges posed by the production, use, and dissemination of toxics, and how Geneva contributes to bringing together the actors working in reversing the toxic tide. This year's Geneva Toxic Free Talks take place over 2 days with conferences and discussions, celebrating an important milestone, the 25 years of the mandate and the struggle for the right to live in a toxic-free environment. Tonight, we are joined by key stakeholders of the Geneva Chemicals and Waste Cluster. Before I give the floor to the moderator of this evening's session, Yves Lador, the Geneva representative of Earth Justice and co-organizer of these talks, let me remind for those who are online with us that you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box, which we will address later if we have time. The summary and the video of this event will be available online as usual on the link that has been shared by my colleagues in the chat. And for those who are with us in the room, it's the link you can see on the screen. With that, Yves, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and let me start by thanking you and your team for helping us in organizing this event. Without the Geneva Environmental Network, it would have been impossible to have this Geneva Toxic Free Talks. So once again, a really great thanks to all of you. And there's a huge team behind working, and we're happy for once to have them with us in the room, because usually we just don't even see them. They just work behind the screen. So it's great to be doing this in person in this way. Let me also welcome all the participants who are online, including those also who probably will see this event on replay, because that's one of the high elements of the Gen. We know that there's quite a big number of replays, so we want to greet you also. And of course, great welcome to all of those who joined us in the room. And it was a very busy day. It's not a very obvious to come here in the evening, and also after all of the sessions going on in the Human Rights Council, or trying to make its way through the Geneva traffic. So really warm welcome for all of you to be here. This is, as Diana has said, the third event of these 2022 Geneva Toxic Free Talks. And we're very happy, as it was said, to mark or celebrate the 25 years of this mandate on toxics and human rights for its short name. We should have been actually celebrating this in 2020, but unfortunately, due to COVID, that was not possible. One of the outcomes and one of the important elements in the discussion that has been raised by this mandate over the last years was the question of the right not to be exposed. And we thought it would be an interesting red line to follow during the day, during this discussion, and to see how much we have been able to go forward in preventing people from being exposed to toxic substances and wastes, and what are the next steps, what are the challenges that this mandate still has to face in the coming years. So without any delay, I'll immediately turn to the Special Rapporteur, Professor Marcus Orellana, so that he can give some introductory remarks. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. And thanks to the Geneva Environment Network once again and the whole team for putting this event together. I am so very pleased to be in such good company with leaders in the chemicals and waste cluster with Switzerland and Uruguay, so that they're sitting here, and the Center for International Environmental Law from civil society. Also with the Secretariat from the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention to celebrate 25 years of achievements, struggles, the challenge of installing a topic that at early outset appeared to be very controversial, but over time has, say, gained a place at the table at the Human Rights Council. I'll try to be brief and make 2 points. In the discussions on the global recognition of the right to a healthy environment that we saw in the General Assembly in New York and also at the Council last year, several states, some genuinely and others, well, not so genuinely, were asking or saying, arguing that the content of this right was not clear, that it needed to be further discussion, despite there having been 5 decades of discussion, there needed to be further discussions to clarify the content. This conversation was settled with the adoption of very important landmark resolutions on this issue. And one element that flows from it is this recognition that the right to a healthy environment can be seen as an umbrella right that brings together the accumulated experience with the interface of human rights and the environment. We are not discovering this linkage today, or we're not discovering this right today. This right, the right to a healthy environment, derives from the right to life, from the right to health. There have been decades of pronouncements by treaty bodies, by special procedures, by national courts, by international tribunals on these issues in connection with a range of rights, some civil and political, information, participation, life, private life, some economic, social, cultural rights, food, water, cultural rights. The list is longer than this, but what I'm saying is that the mandate has benefited and been a part of this process. And so today we can speak with a compelling voice about the right to a toxic-free environment and the right not to be exposed to hazardous substances in relation to all these other rights and in relation to the right to a healthy environment. Of course, Yves, as you pointed out, what are the key challenges today? Further dissemination, further awareness, but certainly implementation. And implementation takes place in so many quarters, at the national level, at the international level. And in those efforts, the mandate will continue. So this is a moment in time where we pause, we take stock, we look back, but then we also look forward, because the work is we're not even close to being finished. The scientific evidence that we're receiving about humanity no longer being in a safe space, and planetary boundaries and chemical pollution are dramatic, they're shocking. They should lead for further action. In relation to the right to a healthy environment, these resolutions by the Council and the General Assembly, they highlight the importance of the full implementation of multilateral environmental agreements. And this is also in line with most recent Council resolution that renewed the mandate, that puts an emphasis on looking at developments in international instruments on chemicals and wastes, including gaps and shortcomings. And this goes to the level of granularity that is needed to engage very specific issues. It's not just big picture. There is a dimension of vision and direction, but then that needs to be translated, looked into the very specific. So I very much welcome the opportunity for engagement with the Basel and Rotterdam and Stockholm conferences of the parties, for example. I believe it was the first time that the mandate was invited to participate in the high-level segment of the BRS COPs. I'm grateful for that. Yesterday, at the interactive dialogue at the Human Rights Council, I spoke about the Minamata Convention on Mercury and this scourge of contamination deriving from small-scale gold mining on miners, on indigenous peoples, on children, other people, groups, and individuals in vulnerable situations. This goes to speak again of the importance of the international instruments in the field in relation to this big picture umbrella right of the right to a healthy environment. So that would be a first point I would make. And the second is even shorter, and it goes to picking up one of the signals from yesterday's debate at the council. One thing that caught my attention was the level of engagement. So for the years that I've been seeing interactive dialogues on this mandate, I believe this was one of the times where many states took the floor, requested. And not only that, but the level of support to the mandate. There were several states that would express a strong commitment to the mandate. And that is, of course, very welcome. And one more thing I'll highlight, it wasn't only coming from any given group. Because if we recall the early days of the toxics and human rights debate, back when the issue was first put in the agenda in 1990 at the then Commission on Human Rights, it was extremely polarized. The resolution was taken to a vote. Most countries abstained except one that voted against. And when the resolution established the mandate, then many countries voted against it. And so that situation was very controversial. There was a lot of finger pointing in the early dynamics. The mandate was reframed, renewed by consensus. And what we saw yesterday was a global embracement of the mandate. I don't want to overdo it either, but it is quite encouraging to see that even some of the countries that often question whether certain environmental issues fall within the mandate of the Human Rights Council, there was none of that. It was very clear that toxics and human rights, that linkage is clearly understood, the significance is clearly understood, and the need for international cooperation, all hands on deck, as it were, to address the severe toxification of the planet. That speaks to the global significance of the mandate. And so in 25 years, if we take a moment to pause and reflect, I would put that on the table as a big achievement that the mandate has been able to gather that consensus, to mobilize that consensus. And now, of course, the challenge is for action. Well, I'll leave it there. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And indeed, it was quite an interesting, quite a lively, quite an engaged discussion yesterday at the Human Rights Council. And as you said, probably one of the most engaged we had over the last year. So it does say something about the issue itself and also how it is now really recognized as a full mandate of the Human Rights Council. And of course, this mandate is actually the oldest environmental mandate of the Human Rights Council. So it's also interesting. The mandate was created in 1995, and the reason for that is it was following unfortunately, a very unfortunate incident of toxic dumping in Africa, and that triggered a reaction from the African countries. So the mandate has been supported by the African countries and actually also by the African group of countries in the Human Rights Council since its very beginning. And so I'd like here just to apologize and to express the apologies of Côte d'Ivoire, who is leading this issue inside the African group, and because of their other commitments to the Human Rights Council, were unable to be with us tonight. And as I said, it is a very heavy schedule in the Human Rights Council. But they have shown always continued commitment to the mandate and supporting this. But what is also interesting is the mandate has evolved because it really started focusing on just toxic waste, and sometimes we see some old habits just limiting the mandate to toxic waste. And actually, when it entered into, and it was created at the time of the Commission on Human Rights, but then when it was re-adopted by the Council and continued by the Human Rights Council in 2006, then there was a very important participation of the Latin American group in updating the mandate and making a big whole mandate so that it covers all of the different issues related to toxic substances and waste. And that's what we've been working on since the beginning of the Human Rights Council. So we are very happy to have with us Valentina Sierra from Uruguay, who is representing the permanent mission of Uruguay. Uruguay has been also very much involved in these issues, constant discussion, constant involvement. So we're very happy to have you with us. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you to Earth Justice for inviting us to be here today. Also to Diana and the Geneva Environment Network for the important organization of this event. It is a real pleasure to join this panel with all of you. We would like to start recognizing the work done so far by the Special Rapporteur, as well as the valuable contributions of the mandate over these years. On the human rights implication of exposure to hazardous substances and toxic waste. In many areas, as illicit traffic, release of toxics, worker exposure, medical waste, on the whole life cycle of hazardous products, and also on the promotion of the right to science. We would like to also reiterate our support as Uruguay to this mandate. Nowadays, we have the opportunity to work together with the Special Rapporteur and include not only the human rights approach, but also the prevention dimension of the negative impacts on human health and the environment in 3 key negotiations that are happening nowadays in the chemical and waste cluster. As you may know, the UNEA 5.2 agreed to start a negotiation process on a legally binding agreement on plastic pollution that addresses the full life cycle of plastics and includes the marine environment. Soon in November, in late November, we're hosting the first meeting of the INC in Punta del Este, Uruguay, and we are looking forward to receiving all of you there in our country. It is important for us to emphasize the dimension of plastic pollution prevention and its related risks to human health, as well as the adverse effects on human well-being and on the environment. We consider that the negative impacts on human health and on the environment and the protection of human rights should be duly reflected in this agreement. Hazardous chemicals are used during production, consumption, and waste management. And that should also be discussed in this process and considered in the treaty. Plastic pollution needs to be tackled through a life cycle approach, as it was recognized in this resolution. Also, we should take into account the significant contribution made by workers under informal and cooperative settings, and also to highlight the health impacts on waste leakers. On the other hand, we had a resolution of 5/8 of UNEA that decided to establish a science policy panel that to contribute further to the sound management of chemicals and waste and to prevent pollution. That panel will be independent and intergovernmental and will develop scientific assessments on this matter. As you also may know, we're facing a triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity loss, and the third pillar, that is pollution. 2 scientific panels were already established, IPCC for climate change and IPES for biodiversity, but we still have a gap. And we consider that this SPP will help us to address and to fill this gap. Also, the demand and the production of chemicals continues to grow and to increase, and new pollutants continue to be uncovered. Also, existing research has demonstrated that chemicals, waste, and pollution impact human health and the environment, and a majority of the world is affected. Polluted air, water, and soil contribute to an estimated 8.9 million deaths worldwide, and we must act urgently to stop this trend. Finally, we're still working under the intersessional process of the International Conference on Chemicals Management, known as ICCM. We achieved very good results recently in the IP4 in Bucharest, and we are continuing this work. But we expect to finalize it in 2023 in ICCM5 that will take place in Bonn. And this multi-stakeholder and multi-sector approach is a forum that we really need to take advantage of, because it provides us a unique opportunity to also include the human rights approach in this new instrument. So we expect to adopt we expect to adopt a very ambitious new framework for SICOM beyond 2020, and we are looking forward to receive the important contributions from the Special Rapporteur on all of these important negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Indeed, it shows the commitment of your country in all of these issues, and I think you really outlined some of the challenges which are coming in front of us. And indeed, there has been already some important contribution from this mandate to these discussions. I'm thinking, of course, the report on plastics that has been produced for the UNGA, if I'm correct. And of course, another report, which is also very important and goes beyond just the issue of toxics, which is the report on the right to science. That was also published last year, and it definitely is a very important element for the discussion of this new science policy platform. So I'm very happy with these words to turn now to the other country who is with us right now, Switzerland. Felix Wertli, you are representing the Ministry of Environment of Switzerland. And Switzerland has been also very much involved in the discussions that were just actually mentioned by Valentina. And I know that you have worked particularly on the question of this issue of right to science and this new platform. So we're looking forward to hearing your views. The floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, and also thank you to Earth Justice and Jane for organizing this event today on this important topic. And I think I can build up on what has been said, in particular by Valentina, gave a perfect overview of what is going on in this field. You have mentioned this the report that the Mark has published, The Right to Science. I think science for sure is very key. Science allows us to know what we talk about. It is the basis, the fundament, also to design then solutions. And the Global Chemicals Outlook 2, so this flagship report by UNEP on chemicals and waste, has identified certain findings. The Global Chemicals Outlook has realized that we have not achieved what we have hoped for to manage soundly chemicals and waste. And among the challenge, he has identified that we have still gaps in knowledge and information of the effects of chemicals and waste on the health, human health and environment. We don't know everything or not enough. Secondly, if we know it, we don't disseminate it enough, or we don't have enough access. That's the second problem. And third, even if we know it and we have access to information, we don't do enough. And at the UNEA, mentioned by Valentina, there was a resolution adopted to establish a science policy panel for the sound management of chemicals and waste and to prevent pollution. I think it's important to note that it was not only a decision to launch negotiations, this process here is also launched, but we have decided to establish. So the willingness of the international community to have better access to information was strongly expressed. I think also interesting in this regard are some of the key functions that have outlined resolutions. So we have horizon scanning, so this idea to check out what is going on. Again, we had also idea not always looking back to say we try to repair what happened in the past, but to look also forward to adapt to know in advance what are new issues coming up, to also have preventive policies. The function of assessment, to look deeper into certain issues, also respond to questions from the chemicals and waste class that will come in. And then we help to identify issues of concern. The idea behind, we know there's a lot of things we have to do, we have to work on. So sometimes can also help to prioritize, to find out what the most important ones. And I think when you think further about this SPP, I think the general feeling at UNEA was to something is policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. So it's for sure we need science. Science has to provide policy options, but it's in governmental panels. At the end of the day, also governments have to decide what to do with recommendations. I think very important is the geographical balance. There was a strong wish from the proponents and also from discussions. we need scientists from all over the world, from the south and the north, fully participating in this panel, bringing not only the knowledge, but also the realities from the ground. And that will be one of the key. Then for sure, we have to stress conflict of interest. I think here in Geneva, we have a lot of good examples. We have from IPCC, for example, we have WHO, we have many other institutions who work with these kind of issues. Key element will be for sure transparency, that you know if scientists contribute, what are the linkages, where they get the funds from, but also kind of information. Are they publicly available? Have they been peer reviewed? This kind of quality. But I think if you want to have a high impactful panel, you need the highest quality standards, kind of a gold standard. And then I think that's very positive also at UNEA. The member states have expressed a strong wish that this is a unit-led process now, and it has to cooperate and work closely against other actors. In particular, WHO was mentioned, but also the IOMC organizations, or the UN agencies working with chemicals and waste, which also the US Secretariat and other relevant conventions. I think that's really, for me, was powerful to see that member states, they want a stronger collaboration of the cluster of the UN, out of the silos, bring the knowledge together, address it together, also because we talk about environment and health. It's not only environment, really both elements have to be addressed. So we hope the outcome of the SVP when it's established will be that we have better advice, better availability of political advice, that we can have more timely actions to prevent and minimize adverse effects of pollution. And yes, that we do more because we know more what's going on, and also increase of resources. I think also we all know the reality, we are not expecting miracles. I think it will be a long process, but for me it was very encouraging to see that it was the first time we have submitted such a resolution at UNEA, and was adopted at the first time. I think the strong willingness, that was really encouraging. And I think the benchmark to see 10 or 20 years what we have to see if we have done better. I think the benchmarks are quite easy, but we have to check. You know, we have to see, do we know more? Have we enhanced the knowledge? Have we improved accessibility to knowledge? Is it better available? Is it easier accessible, in particular for governments? And then have we triggered more actions? And I think if we can respond to that in 10, 20 years, yes, then we have done a great step forwards, and also contribute effectively to the human rights situation, because we do better and we do more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We all hope it's going to be quicker than just 10 years or 20 years, definitely, because indeed, I think you really underlined some elements which are actually in the report of the Special Rapporteur on the right to science. And it's interesting, for the very first panel we had at the beginning of the afternoon, where we had a number of constituencies expressing themselves as right holders. We saw how, in a number of situations, the information and scientific information was a challenge, not because the scientific information doesn't exist, but because you have this production of doubt that a number of actors are using, and basically making the whole thing very complicated for the public to understand. So what you have just said about the importance of the conflict of interest and transparency will contribute also to the consolidation of knowledge. We faced that in the field of climate change. We saw the importance of having this approach by the IPCC, and it is interesting to see that the decision of the UNEA is going for a panel which is something similar to the IPCC, and not just a platform as we have with IPBS. And we can all hope that IPBS will also be improved and highlighted as also becoming a panel and not just a platform, because definitely we are facing extinctions issues, and it needs probably to come to the same level that these two bodies will have in the near future. So thank you very much for this presentation, and I think it gives us a very clear image of the challenges which are coming up for the mandate and for this issue more generally speaking. But we'd like to hear now the environmental community and some of those who have been working just specifically on these different substances. And we have the pleasure to have with us Rolf Payet, who is the Executive Secretary of the synergies between the three conventions, the Basel Convention, the Rotterdam Convention, the Stockholm Convention. And Rolf, you have been working in collaboration, as it was said before, with this mandate. And the mandate has contributed also to some meeting with the parties of the BRS conventions. So we're really very happy to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's indeed an honor to be here this afternoon with you all, and of course to celebrate the 25 years of the mandate. And indeed, the mandate to deal with the issue of toxics is embedded in our three conventions. It relates to the protection of human health and the environment. And I think it's important to go back to this fundamental chapeau in all the three conventions, which points to the objective of those conventions in meeting and protecting human health and environment. And in there, embedded in there, of course, is the concept of the right of the person to life, but not also to life, but to health, but also to food, to shelter, and to all the other basic. And when we look at the chemicals and waste agenda, we see that it touches all these important areas of human rights. In fact, I will go as far as say that it is one of the central themes in the issue and discussion on rights. I mean, when we're talking about, for example, asbestos, which has not been listed yet in the Rotterdam Convention, asbestos is traditionally used in construction, and is an argument used by many countries as affordable housing, affordable shelter. If we look at DDT, there's been a big challenge in trying to face DDT. 30 years we've been trying to, and hopefully I see some light at the end of the tunnel with the development and the testing now of the vaccine, dealing with malaria in Africa. And hopefully that will move us close. But of course, there is a human right to health and living. Then if we take an example on food, for example, we have a huge range of chemicals. Some of them have been listed in the Stockholm, some have been following the big procedure in the Rotterdam. And I would like to focus on, yes, we can discuss the effectiveness of the convention as it goes, but I would like to also look at the opportunities and the successes that have been happening with the implementation of these three conventions, addressing the issue of the human right with respect to toxic and chemicals and waste. And here I'm bundling everything together for obvious reasons that we don't have a lot of time to go to the details. But I think the concept of not in my backyard, has been around since the 1960s, 1970s, but now you see it really happening at the national level. People have always been concerned about the landfill and incinerator. I think especially in Europe and Western countries, where people have taken to the streets, where development which was closely linked to either chemical industry or waste. And we have not seen that so much in the developing world until recently, when there's more awareness and more education. And for me, that's a fundamental area where we need to put a lot of effort in. I was in a conference last week on online learning. People were asking me, what are you doing in an online learning conference? But it was amazing. There were ministers of education. There were ministers from open university, heads of open universities. There were people involved in designing curriculum, and they were trying to work out how do we bring those issues from a very early age. And we can see that the challenge, they were surprised at what I was trying to tell them, because they were completely off the radar in terms of the issue of chemicals and wastes, and what we can do in trying to increase awareness, not only in the schools, but also in lifelong learning, how people can learn. And yes, we've been developing MOOCs and whatever, but the reach has not been that deep. We need to see how we can reach out in terms of people, both in people in terms of knowing what their rights are, but also in terms of exercising that right, because it's great to have all these fantastic statements, which Marcus has so eloquently talked about, and which I am also involved in at the international level. But if it's not echoing in the concept of not in my backyard by the local people and the people on the ground, then our job is half done. But what I've seen in the last, let's say, 5 years, with respect to waste, is we've seen a lot of concrete examples of countries where there have been riots, not over food, but over waste from a certain country coming to their country, even though they don't live close to the landfill, but the issue of waste dumping in the country has been an issue. We've had containers sent back on ships to the extent now the shipping industry is scared to even carry waste because of it's seen as a hot potato. For me, that's a significant advancement. And of course, the conventions have played an important role in that respect. And the Basel Convention, the plastic amendments, I think, has sent a very strong signal on the issue of transboundary movement. And earlier this year, we had the COPs also adopt the amendments on electronic waste. Electronic waste is something of a big challenge for parties to try and see how we can address it and avoid dumping and avoid the developing world being used as a place where we send all our electronic waste to. So we've seen advances in that area. Of course, it remains to be seen how effective we'll be, but I think we will be effective if we start putting all the works in place, both in terms of government policy and regulation, both in terms of industry standards and design and all sorts of things, but also in terms of getting the community, getting the people involved, and sorting out the issue of, for example, burning of electronic materials to obtain the precious metals in illicit landfills, littering the developing world. So I see this as a potential area. I've also seen in our conventions, especially in the Stockholm one, we're doing a listing of PFAS, which is a chemical used in firefighting foam. The firefighting community coming to our corps, I mean, they were lined up with their uniforms and everything, saying, look, we have our right, we spend our life saving people, but we have our right as well because of the increased amount of cancers among firefighting people. So we've seen that also reflected in work and in labor relations, in the protection of their rights, to also have the occupational rights, so to speak, in that way, prevented. So I just would like to finish by saying this mandate should not be seen in isolation or in a side. It should be, and I think our effort should go towards developing those connections, because this is where we will bring a lot of importance of this issue of chemicals and waste is by seeing how this right and this mandate connects to all the other rights. And I think once governments, people start to realize that, without addressing the issue of our right to a toxic-free, let's call it toxic-free for argument's sake here, to a toxic-free environment, home, job, and food and whatever, I think then it starts to have a lot more meaning to the people who are really concerned about, right to shelter, right to food, and right to health, and these things. So I just wanted to stop here, and maybe I can do some more comments from my side. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll come back on a few issues. Well, thank you very much for your contribution. And now, after this contribution from the environment aspects and the different multilateral environmental agreement, let's turn to the health community. You've mentioned already, some of the previous speakers did mention the importance of WHO, and we have the privilege to have with us online Maria Neira, who's the director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health at WHO. So Maria, you heard the previous contributions. We look forward to hearing how WHO sees these issues. And thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be with you. Shame that I cannot be presential. I could do it. I thought I will never reach on time the center, but I think now I could be doing it. Anyway, I'm happy to be connected at least. Of course, all the previous presentations are resonating on a very, very positive for the health community, and particularly for the World Health Organization. As you know, we have been, for the last years, we have been trying to use all the scientific evidence to demonstrate that, and one of our biggest reports, which is still very, very valid, is the one where we estimate the burden of diseases, morbidity and mortality associated with exposure to environmental risk factors. And this is an argument that consistently comes out, and we use it very strongly. 25% of the global burden of diseases, 25% is linked to exposure to modifiable environmental risk factors. I know that this is an argument that you heard many times, that we have saying in all the units meetings, and we have using it very strongly, but I think we need to keep using it because this is a very strong health argument. Today at New York, at the General Assembly, everybody's talking about the climate crisis, is talking about the need for a pandemic treaty, is talking about the need to universal health coverage. They are talking about the importance of tackling the non-communicable diseases. And when I hear all of those statements, all of those interventions, I think, well, we have it. I mean, tackle the environmental causes of the diseases, and the benefits for health will be enormous. It will be in terms of reducing air pollution, and therefore reducing 7 million deaths every year, premature deaths occurring every year linked to air pollution. It will represent the benefit as well of all sustainable food systems, and therefore, again, major health benefits for us. It will represent a more sustainable use and productions, and of course, including plastics and the toxics and the chemicals that we are using and abusing of. It will be essentially the most attractive, powerful, primary prevention strategy ever. I think it will be the famous first do not harm that they teach us at the medical school, and it will be the basic prevention is better than cure. So the WHO is very happy to keep with the scientific evidence. Now, looking at the plastic treaty, we need to look at what would be our role. How can we contribute? We did already, as you know, a couple of reports, but we need to keep doing those, providing the scientific evidence, mobilizing the health community to put more pressure on governments in the name of health. I think COP27 will be again a very important opportunity to do that as well, attracting attention on the importance of prevention, which, let me share this with you, unfortunately, on the health community and the health care expenditure, only 3% of the resources are going for prevention, 3% of the resources on health expenditure. And I think this is something that has to change. Of course, we need to keep with a very high level of resources for cure, for treatment, for better hospitals and curative services. But unless we invest a little bit more on prevention and then being able to address emerging issues related to environment, ecosystems destroyed, biodiversity, the toxics free that we need our planet for, we will not be able to provide the health services that we would like to provide to all of you. I'm calling you because I think the health arguments is extremely important, and we need the conventions, we need the agreements, we need the UNEA treaties, we need as well mobilization and coherent strategy to defining exactly the functions that we need to put in place, because these days the competition for crisis is huge. So we need to be very clear on demonstrating the importance of this investment on this recovery, and not allowing conflictive commercial interests to divert from our agenda. I am a little bit concerned about the echo, so I'm not sure whether you have been hearing me well. But I think I will stop here and thank you again very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. We heard you very well, at least here in the room, and I hope that all our listeners and people attending from online did the same. Thank you very much for your contribution. You really highlighted some of the elements that this mandate actually has promoted very much, due to precisely the outreach, not just working within the Human Rights Council, but working with the other bodies which are directly concerned. I'm thinking with the ILO for the workers, occupational health, with the MEAs that we've just heard, with Rolf Payet, and now with your contribution, definitely we see how much it is important to articulate the work that is done by WHO. And in a way, it's a bit of a Geneva challenge for all of us, as we are here, trying not to be too much stopped by the Geneva traffic, but this is something we should be able to overcome, so that precisely we can meet more and strategize together, so that we can have a stronger outcome of the work which is done by the international institutions. So thank you very much for your contribution, pushing us in this direction. So now let me turn to the last but not the least speaker, and David Azulai from the Center for International Environmental Law knows how much I value and support the work which is done by his organization. STEL has been since a long time active in this field of trying to turn the toxic tide. You have also had a leading role within the IPAN movement. So, David, how do you see precisely this, what has been achieved over the last 25 years through this mandate, and what are the challenges in which you are yourself and your organization very much involved? The floor is yours, and thank you for being with us, David.
Thank you very much for that almost no pressure introduction. And thank you very much to Jen and Earth Justice for organizing this event. This is not only a pleasure to meet with friends, but it's also a very intellectually stimulating and encouraging way to get together and look at the future challenges. It's almost impossible to say something new after all the distinguished speakers, and they've pretty much covered the issue. So I'm going to try to add a little to the reflection and try to open the reflections for the Q&A session and for the question. One thing that was made very clear by Valentina, which I think is at the heart, should be at the heart of our reflection, is that reflection around the three planetary crises. This is almost threatening to become a sustainable development kind of phrase where we all use it without making sure that we capture the real essence of what we're saying. What we're saying is that we're currently living a situation where there are converging crises that literally threaten the survival of the human species on Earth. It doesn't threaten the planet, it threatens our survival on the planet. And this is what we're talking about. These are not just words in long negotiated document. This is the scientific assessment of where we are now. And in that discussion, because each of those crises is absolutely urgent and life-threatening, we sometimes have the tendency to try to solve one at the expense of the other, or try to address a particular issue without looking at the entirety of the impact. And this is where the human rights framework provides a possible response to that, to us going in many directions, because it provides the unifying principles about how to consider and how to approach these particular crises and how we can do this. It was mentioned just before by two other distinguished speakers that this was one of the reasons. There was one call from the special rapporteurs and during the 25 years to develop their work with the MEAs and with the instruments, trying to effectively address through legally binding provisions those different issues. And in that respect, I find it extremely encouraging for us to be thinking about human rights, again, as the framework or the umbrella, as we're saying, that should help us articulate our responses to the different crises. And so, in terms of looking at the future, I want to think of two aspects. One is setting the frame for our responses and for the future responses, for how we conceptually think about the crises and the problems we're trying to address. And the other was the point that was raised by Marcos about now moving to the implementation. And I'll start with that aspect of implementation with maybe a little reality check. Taken from the report from the previous special rapporteur that identify that in the world, one worker dies every 15 seconds from toxic exposure, which means that since we've started that discussions, dozens of workers have died just trying to do their job and get a livelihood because those chemicals were not adequately dealt with and because of a possible neglect of that particular story or the focus on other issues. That is the reality that we live in, and that is the urgency that we're facing. And again, the Special Rapporteur Marcos and his predecessors have developed a very impressive body of work about how can we address this, because there won't be one solution. It won't be about, oh, we just need to do this, and then we're going to solve that problem. Life is complex, the world is complex, our economic system is complex, so we need to be able to devise step-by-step approach. And a lot of work has been done to the right of science, as was mentioned before, to the right of access to information, which is still very far from being realized. If I ask anyone in the world, do you know what chemicals goes into this plastic or that product or anything? Nobody knows the answer. And that is a major challenge, something that we absolutely have to work with, that is key to the future. So, right to science, knowledge, right to access to information, right to participation in decision making. It's one thing to have access to information. It is another to actually participate effectively and represent your community in those decision makings. Those are effectively human rights approach and human rights, or are the way human rights can guide us to implement practical solutions, practical policy decisions at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, about how can we make the world a better place? How can we actually advance towards solving some of those issues? The second part of what I wanted to mention was this idea of setting the frame and how we approach this issue. And here, the example of the plastic treaty was taken before. And I think this is a very good example because the plastic life cycle and the plastic value chain is extremely complex. From the extraction of the fossil fuel to the building of pipeline to transport those to the refineries, the refining, and what happens to the local communities around this, how consumers are being exposed to a number of toxics that they don't know anything about, how the elimination and the treatment of those problems. At each stage, not only are there health impacts, not only are there climate impact, but each stage of this life cycle presents specific and individual violation of human rights for different groups of humans and different communities. When it goes to the extraction and to the refining and the creation of the building blocks, there are many communities that live in the vicinity of those facilities, and it's not an unfortunate coincidence that those areas where those companies are concentrated, whether it's in Louisiana, whether it's in Singapore or in Texas, they're called Cancer Alley, and for a reason. This is a place where obvious rights violations are happening. And it's a little sobering to go back to the discussion to get to the treaty, and it was really something to celebrate for all of us and most of us were actually in Nairobi, so it's a pleasure to remember. I know we're all very moved at this, but if you remember the weeks, months, and years of discussion, inserting a mention of human rights in the mandate has been extremely controversial. It means that there's still a large number of countries in the world who absolutely want to separate issues of environment and issues of human rights. And as we've heard from all the previous examples before, there is no way we're going to address environmental issues without putting the rights of humans. And that doesn't mean that the rights of humans should go over the rights of nature or the impacts on the environment. But by putting the humans at the center, what we will get is increase in implementation, increase in awareness, and then further operationalizing of the principles that were developed by Marcos and his predecessor. And in that respect, I want to mention one very recent example where human rights approach and rights-based legal arguments have literally changed the life of hundreds of thousands of people in the Cancer Alley that I was mentioning just before. You might know that, you might not be surprised if you follow these issues a little, that currently the chemical producing companies and plastic producing companies are investing heavily to increase their capacity of production of these different substances that have pushed us over yet another planetary boundaries. Well, one of those companies, the Formosa company, was planning to build a huge cracker to produce more PET in the area of Louisiana. Some communities mobilized, got together, and not based on the NIMBY approach where we just don't want this to be built in this particular place and it's fine, it can be built elsewhere. But they brought in their legal challenge, elements of human rights, whether, again, it's the right to health, right to life, right to safe housing, right to access to food, etc. And also have centered their argument around the historical violation of human rights and how these plants were basically benefiting from being implanted or placed on former slave country and former plantations. And all these arguments, together with a number of other, convinced the judge to rescind the permit for that particular, it was going to be the biggest new facility to produce more plastic. And the arguments that won that particular case were deeply rooted in a rights-based approach. And that, I think, shows us the future, shows us how building of this right can actually help us make a difference, because this is what we want. It's very exciting to get UNGA resolution or resolution in the council or having these great discussions around it. But the reason we do it is to lower the number of people dying, the number of people getting sick, the number of childs not being born because of fertility issues, because of those different chemicals. And these cases and the rise in legal cases and legal litigation that bring in human rights elements, generally, not just for toxics, also for climate change and other, really points in the direction of where this mandate could be going. One of the major challenges that was highlighted also by a previous speaker, I think it was Maria who just mentioned that, one of the major challenge that we will need to address and one of the major change that we'll need to implement is if we want the human rights approach to succeed, we're going to have a conversations about how human rights sometimes conflict with corporate rights. And corporate rights are very often taking the predominance on many decisions. Again, when I'm saying this, I'm both talking about what happened until now and a little about now, but the world is changing. I don't know how many of you have looked or listened to the speech from the Secretary General of the UN yesterday. The kinds of things that he said at the podium in front of the UN General Assembly were things that you would only hear in crazy Green Khmer activist meeting. That's 10 years ago. And now it's coming out of the mouth of the UN Secretary General in front of the UN General Assembly. So that should give us hope. That should give us hope that even though it may appear that it's still difficult to get the recognition of rights-based approach in environmental MEAs, corporate rights are still vibrant and are still a major obstacle to the realization of human rights around the world. The world is changing. And by developing the mobilization and coherent strategy that was also mentioned before, I believe that the rights not to be exposed, the conceptual rights of not to be exposed, but even just the development of the overall rights-based approach to limit exposure and to avoid exposure to toxic chemicals of all humans around the planet is the way forward and what will probably allow us to reach the goal that we've all set for ourselves in the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for your excellent and vibrant presentation. This reminds me actually that when we were talking about yesterday's debate in the Human Rights Council, the issue of the triple crisis has been raised, and I think it was twice or three times, I didn't count. But it's quite interesting to see that this issue is coming in broad by states on the table, which is something new. And that, of course, makes a link with the right to a healthy and sustainable environment, which has been now recognized, and probably will, by linking the two, we do have some kind of an approach. It's interesting also to see that now, I mean, here we're celebrating the 25 years of the oldest mandate, environmental mandate of the Human Rights Council, but we do have at least 3 mandates, which are each one covering 3 aspects of this crisis. But you have also a number of other mandates, like the right to food, the right to water, the right to housing, who are also integrating very, very seriously environmental aspects in how they can implement these type of rights. So I think, indeed, it goes really into the direction of what you're saying. Although the challenges are still huge, the resistance, sometimes desperate, is dispiriting us, there has been a number of real progress and steps forward over the last years. So with these comments, I'd like to turn back to the special rapporteur, and if he'd like to make some comments on some elements of discussions after all what we heard, and before we turn to other Q&As.
Thank you, Yves, and many thanks to everyone that has taken the floor. It's very enriching, very insightful conversation, and it leaves me thinking of, I started putting down some words and then reflecting on the number of issues that the mandate has dealt with over the years. And so here's a non-binding list, non-exhaustive. Heavy metals, armed conflict, plastics, new climate technologies, highly hazardous pesticides, shipbreaking, science, false solutions, children, workers, indigenous peoples, women, navigation, information, mining, transfer of polluting industries, access to remedy, accountability, human rights principles for a circular economy. This could go on, but I think I'm trying to get at with this list is that picking up on the point, Yves, that you made at the beginning, the mandate was born and first framed as one of toxic wastes, and then it was reframed. So it's no longer about just toxic waste; it's about the life cycle of chemicals and wastes, and this opens such a range of opportunities for the mandate to engage the various processes that are ongoing, and Valentina Sierra mentioned several of them, ICCN5, BRS, the UN Environmental Assembly, Minamata. Some of the speakers talked about the complexity of reality, complexity of those discussions, so engaging these various forums is of course not easy. I would put a plea on the table, and everyone that's listening, for earmark funding for the mandate, to expand capacity to engage these various forums, because the mandate focuses on its mandated activities at the Human Rights Council, and then tries to engage, the broader picture as best as it can, including the casework. And here I want to echo what David has mentioned times. These sound like abstractions. There's a lot of abstractions, especially here in Geneva. There's a lot of abstraction in the international, the legal world, and diplomacy. But it does come down to the actual experience of people. And one of the things that I've tried to do has been to bring the United Nations through this mandate, to closer to people. So every time I have the chance to do an official country visit or an unofficial academic or exploratory country visit, there are various names for this, and this is also in the casework. Allegation letters, other letters, sent letters to the United States on the Louisiana Cancer Alley situation. Because of the structural racism exhibited or demonstrated by the disproportionate burden of pollution suffered by Black communities as opposed to white communities that are separated by county lines. The figures are startling and shocking. And so it's very welcome to see how the access to remedy, the judicial system can at times work to bring these issues into its analysis and begin to provide relief to those who have for so many years been systematically disenfranchised and marginalized from decision making. One last thing I'd like to mention, and again, Eve, picking up on your point about this being the oldest environmental mandate, and now we have a new mandate on climate change and human rights, is the collaboration between the environmental mandates. It's not just I would say, a personal delight to work with the brilliant Dr. David Boyd and with Ian Fry, but also on the thematics of finding synergies and finding spaces for collaboration. With David Boyd, we have submitted several amicus curiae briefs to international tribunals, national tribunals, in cases that involve the right to a healthy environment, in cases that involve climate change. Now, with the creation of the new climate mandate, I am certain that we will find also new opportunities for collaboration, thinking about the future and what's coming. Example, this interface between toxification and decarbonization, questions of new technologies and old technologies that are reviving, say nuclear energy and its waste, but also what's the impact of the electrification of mobility? Just see cars, but also bikes and life cycle, lithium and extraction and water and indigenous peoples. And so there are many issues that need to be addressed for us as an international community to really be able to put on the table solutions that are sustainable, that are effective, and they won't be effective and they won't be legitimate unless a human rights-based approach is at the heart of or inspiring those solutions and conversations. So with that, thanks again for giving me the floor.
Well, thank you very much for your answers and for sharing these thoughts. Actually, when you were mentioning the nuclear issues, for example, as you just mentioned now, there is a resolution right now in the Human Rights Council on the legacy. And one of the problems we have when we're talking about pollution and toxics, there's this huge legacy of previous activities. And one of them being what has leftovers, or I don't know how to call them, but at least a nuclear legacy of some nuclear tests. So it's an ongoing discussion. I'm not going to put the Marshall Islands on the spot. They are now here in the room. So if ever they have any questions, they're very welcomed. And anybody else also might have some questions, please feel free to raise them. But just to finish on what I was saying, it is an issue which is now being discussed in the Human Rights Council, and we do hope that it will be a successful outcome at the end in 2 weeks, in order to recognize all the challenges linked to this legacy, and so that there is a real support to the communities in the field which are still today victim of these leftovers of the previous nuclear tests. And some of the stories of how it has been conducted are absolutely horrible, and actually brings us back to environmental racism and horrible colonization patterns. So quite an important issue. Now let me turn to the other people in the room, if there's any other questions. Before I'm going to ask to the different speakers perhaps a final word of, and a final comment. But before doing that, yes, please. There's one question.
It's a bit of comment, but also, my name is Ana Maria Suarez Franco from the International as we work on the right to foods. When I was hearing you, especially Valentina and David, speaking about the 3 environmental crises, of course, the current food crisis came to my mind. And this is a food crisis that many attribute to the war in the Ukraine, but in the social movements and civil society, we connect the crisis to the agro-industrial food system that is very connected to the other 3 crises. If we look at the industrial production of food is very related to the loss of biodiversity. According to the Right to Food and Nutrition Watch 2020, the 23% of the greenhouse emissions comes from agriculture, apart from the model of agricultural production and a specific 11% from deforestation related to agriculture. And also in this industrial model, we see the intensive use of agrotoxins, and there are plenty of reports also on that. So I wanted here to recall that maybe also to ensure this transition needed to overcome the three environmental crises, we need the transformation of food systems. And for here, it's very important that the transformation is also based on human rights, which means ensuring participation of producers, especially the small food producers, workers who are the victim of the system, one of them, and consumers. And this also means maybe rethinking the system, thinking about the need of transition to agroecology, and also to the need of, as Marco said, a strong accountability regulation beyond diligence that allow us to ensure that in the global value chain connected to food production and consumption, we can hold those who are contaminating, destroying biodiversity, and creating more emissions to be live. And I would like to hear from you, what do you think in times of extension, where some regions, even Europe, are coming back to fertilizers that we were dismantling? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for sharing the comment and on the question. I have, I guess, two reactions. One is that I took on the mandate, went back to look at what previous mandate holders, my predecessors, had done, and I was, I guess, surprised to see that the first mandate holder already had brought in a very strong focus on corporate accountability. That this preceded the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So the focus on dirty industries, relocating, on export of dirty technologies, on dealing with the true costs of products. And that brings in the loopholes that still exist. And one of them is something that I have been following my predecessors' work on the export of, on the call for the ban of export of banned highly hazardous pesticides. These are pesticides that are banned in their country of origin because the evidence is overwhelming that they are dangerous, and yet these countries produce them for export to developing countries where they are used, say for soy cultivation, that then gets exported back to where the pesticides came so that they can feed pork and cattle for consumption of meat in those countries. And so here we have a structural problem of the kind that you're pointing of the food, industrial food system. And it connects with double standards in environmental standards, it connects with globalization patterns, unsustainable modes of consumption and production. This is all interrelated. So how do we get at the true costs of products so that the market can actually work? That this is not only a market failure, but in dealing with that complexity, human rights issues need to be at the heart, because the communities that are exposed to the pesticides in the global south, they are the ones paying the price. And that is, there's a fundamental unfairness to that, of, as I mentioned, children being born with malformations. That's where the mandate goes to these countries, to bring the UN closer to them and to give them a vote, raise visibility. That's the human rights work, so as for these loopholes to be closed. So the work is ongoing, the challenges are big, but I very much echo the point that all these issues that we're dealing with are interrelated, and they concern models of production and consumption that are unsustainable. And one footnote is the second point that I thought I mentioned is that when talking about the triple planetary crisis, it has become a bit of a mantra, a little bit. But let's remember what were the origins of this. It was an attempt, speaking first person, because I was involved in advocating for certain key positions, not to just speak about the climate crisis, and then, or not just about the climate and biodiversity crisis, because pollution is very much a chemical exposure, is very much an element of that. So I think it's a very good step forward to recognize that in the environmental field, at least, looking at all the interrelationships that we talked about, in the environmental field, we're dealing with, and echoing your point, an existential, this not a minor issue, it's really an existential crisis.
So just because I'm minding the time, I just want to check with Jen if I'd just like to give the floor to all of the different speakers for a final word. And David, if you were able to give the answer in your final comment, would you agree with that?
Sure.
And so I'll just follow perhaps in the order that we started, and perhaps start with you, Valentina.
Okay.
I'm going to give a few reactions after all what we've heard.
Thank you very much, for giving the floor again. Just a very brief and final words. And after all we heard and the importance that was highlighted and repeated many times on the implication of human rights and the impacts or negative impacts on health due to the pollution, I think now more than ever, and all the opportunities that we have nowadays, all the negotiations that are happening and starting now, we really need to use all these in the international arena and to highlight the human rights approach, to include the human rights approach in the different instruments that we are negotiating. And we are looking forward to contribute to these discussions as country and to work closely with a special rapporteur on all of these issues to achieve this important area. And to also enhance the human rights implications on all these matters. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for this great discussion. It was really stimulating. I think for me, one of the key points is that for the full enjoyment of the human rights, we need a strong environmental governance system. If we are not able to manage, for example, chemical waste properly, then we fail to protect and value the human rights. And I'm looking at the role, I'm not sure if we do that, I don't think so. But it would also be interesting to check. We always show with the conventions, no, how we contribute to the SDGs. That's a picture see quite often. This area contributes to SDG, and then you show them the targets. Do we show how we contribute to the full enjoyment of human rights? I don't know if this is part of our reporting or from a communication side of the MEAs. It's also interesting to turn around, not only saying, I understand that approach that you have to check where we are not respecting human rights and so on. It's also interesting to see that we can illustrate how good governance, international governance, enables the protection of human rights. That's just one thought that comes down.
Well, thank you.
Well, I think I will still persist on my original premise that. And I've seen that in the discussions here is that we're trying now, what I fear is siloing human rights into a silo, where it is not correct, because we are repeating the same problems that we've had before. And it comes back to my comment on NIMBY. NIMBY is a right issue. It's a right issue when they have land rights and all the other rights. But if we throw out NIMBY and say it's not a rights issue, I think this is what, because it's not mentioned rights in there or human rights in there, then it is not a human right thing. And the same thing, I go back to my convention. My convention mentioned protection of the environment and protection of human health. It's a rights issue. It doesn't mention human rights, but it is linked to human rights. And we are making, I'm hoping we don't make the same mistake again. We start to silo human rights. So now people will switch on the human rights hat when they deal with the issue of human rights, and then when they deal with environmental issues, they deal with environmental issues. And I think we need, and I'm urging 25 years after the mandate, that we do explore those linkages. And I think we've seen it before, as been mentioned, with water. We started off with access to water. I've been through this whole process, but now we're talking about quality of water. These are all, going up and really fine-tuning the rights. Access to food is fine, but if the food is of food with chemicals, then we are saying access to quality food, right? So, and different countries are at different levels of this, and I think this narrative needs to percolate. Otherwise, we will be ourselves be subject to siloing again on one another. Very, very important and fundamental issue, which I think comes from the charter. The UN Charter itself is a human-based, it's a rights-based charter. So let's not kid ourselves. What people have not been able to do, and what we have been able to do in the last maybe 75 years of the UN, is link those rights issues to the issues that we are dealing every day-to-day basis, that we're not calling it as a issue. So I think I will rest here.
Well, thank you very much. And I think what you've just said really goes in the line of what we heard from Maria Neira, who unfortunately had to leave us. So I can't give her the floor again, which I would have liked to do, but I think it definitely echoes what she said. And there's a very strong convergence here. David, the floor is finally yours.
Thanks very much. And I'm going to take this last minute also to respond to the question, because I feel like I've been a little tame, and usually when I'm invited here, I'm supposed to be a little more provocative and go a little bit further. And I think I've been very nice until now. But the point that was raised by Fian, I think, is really key and raised by others. Who produces the fertilizers? Who produces the pesticides? Who produces the endocrine disruptors? Who produces the oil and gas that is made to do all this? It's one single industry. It's the oil and gas industry, it's the petrochemical industry, whose rights have clearly been given prominence over human rights over the past 30, 40, 50 years. And while we're having these discussions here, I'm afraid that is a lesson that we haven't learned. When we discuss about the plastic treaty, we still hear the majority opinion saying, oh, but the solution rests with the industry. When we hear about the science policy panel, we'll still hear, oh, without the industry, we'll never get there. We have to come to terms with the idea that there is a fundamental conflict of interest between the petrochemical industry that profits and benefits from the poisoning and the toxifying of the world, and the human rights that we're trying to protect and uphold here. And I think, and the Human Rights Council and work is happening in the human rights is moving in that direction, is helping us taking this into account. But I do think that this is something that we probably have to reckon with. If we truly want to uphold human rights, we're going to have to make a decision whether corporate rights supersedes human rights or not. And right now, this is my biggest concern for the future of what we've discussed. Yes, siloing is an issue. Yes, all those other issues. But if we do everything right, and we still continue to believe that corporate rights supersedes human rights, and they're more important, we're going to fail. And so this is a last final little, motivational provocation, because this is why I'm invited in those meetings. Let's be clear. For everyone to start integrating and considering this in how we're thinking of the future of addressing our issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you for filling this role. So I really want to thank all of the speakers for their contribution to tonight. And before I give the special rapporteur a very final word, just a small takeaway word, I would once again want to thank the Geneva Environmental Network for having made this discussion possible, and also to each one of you as a speaker for coming tonight and for giving your time for this discussion. I think it was really a very, very useful one, because it is, we're going to build on what we have been discussing here. It has also echoed some of the elements we heard not this morning, at the beginning of the afternoon in the very first debate. And tomorrow, actually, we are going to continue 2 small dialogues, which are going to focus precisely on exploring some of the issues, like on non-polluting alternatives, because we had a very good comment before about by working in silos very often, one solution, we don't solve the problem, we just move it to another place. And so when we're talking about non-polluting alternatives, and it's incredible because a number of them exist, but they're not promoted. And we do have an issue with the industry, exactly as you said, David. How come some existing technologies are not used at all when they are here at our disposal, and we will solve a number of issues. So that'll be one of the first exploration. Another one goes to what has been mentioned by the special rapporteur, the question of conflicts. It's an issue that has come again, and unfortunately is coming more seriously recently. So we'll explore also some of the elements linked to that. So these are the two dialogues we'll have tomorrow afternoon for the second day of this Geneva Toxic Free Talks. So once again, thank you for your participation to all of you. Thank you for those who are attending. And I'll turn over, before going back to the Geneva Environmental Network, I'll turn to the special rapporteur for some concluding words.
Well, thank you very much, Yves. I wish only to echo the thanks to Uruguay and Switzerland for your leadership internationally on chemicals and wastes. Without it, we would be left without a conference and without champions that are key to addressing the issues to civil society. And of course, CL is the leader in civil society for constantly linking us back to reality and for partnering and providing information that makes up the mandate, makes it useful. And of course, to BRS for the engagement, the openness and the collaboration, all of this is very, very much appreciated. Only to say that in 25 years, there's been wealth of conceptual development, and that gives us a good basis and a good platform to continue to fight the struggle in defense of rights, because we are facing very serious issues. And so we're ready to continue.
Thank you very much. And so I'll turn back to the Geneva Environmental Network. We'll have the privilege to invite us for the celebration of these 25 years with a small reception by the end of this day. Diana, once again, thank you to you and to your whole team, and I'm giving back the floor to you.
Just a few words to say that tomorrow we are meeting again in the same room. So most of you didn't know this space before. Now that you know it, we welcome you to join us tomorrow for the first talk at 1:30 p.m. and who is online to also join us tomorrow. So for those who are here in person, we have also other few events coming up in Geneva that might appear on the screen. That we can discuss later. Outside this room, you have a small reception. So we invite you all to join and to continue these talks informally. And really have a great time here. Thank you very much all for joining us. And thank you, Eva, for moderating all these sessions.